There's this moment from my childhood that has never left me. I must have been about 10 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of my dad's car. It was a summer, one of those long, bright evenings where everything feels slower and lighter. The windows were down, the air was warm, and the music was loud. My dad was singing at the top of his lungs, completely lost in the song, tapping the steering wheel, smiling like the world was made for just that moment alone. People were walking past, glancing over, and I remember the rising sense of embarrassment, that self-conscious awareness children get when they first realise other people are watching. I told him to stop. I said, "Dad, this is embarrassing," and he just stopped. He turned the music off and the car filled with silence, and he looked straight at me for a few seconds, not angry or hurt, but just still. And then he said, "Never let what other people think of you change who you are or what you do." And he paused and he gave a small smile and he turned the music back up really loud and carried on singing. At that age, I didn't fully understand what that meant, but I felt it. The weight of those words pressed somewhere deep. That was the first time I saw what freedom looked like, not the kind that needs permission or applause, but the kind that exists simply because you decide it does. For years, that moment stayed buried in the background of my life. I didn't think much about it, but somehow it changed everything. When I grew older and built my business, I carried that same energy without even realizing it. The drive, the fearlessness, the love of creation. I was building something that mattered to me and I threw myself into it completely. But somewhere along the way, something began to shift. Success changes the shape of your inner world. It starts small, a little more responsibility here, a few expectations there. Then before you know it, you're living inside of an idea of who you think you should be rather than the person you were always meant to be. At first, I told myself it was normal, that exhaustion was a badge of honor, that stress was just proof that I cared. But beneath the surface, I could feel something hollow forming. I had become the business. Every good week lifted me up and every bad week crushed me. And even though on the outside everything looked fine, inside I was quietly losing myself. It was strange how easily we forget the simplest of truths. That joy does not come from achievement. That self-worth does not live in other people's eyes. That freedom is not something that you earn, it's something that you remember. I had forgotten my father's lesson. The same boy who once learned not to care what people thought had grown into a man completely shaped by it. I was living for perception again, the approval of customers, staff, friends, the community. I was chasing an invisible standard of what success was supposed to look like. It happens to more of us than we admit. We start with passion and purpose, and somewhere along the road we trade them in for performance. We become actors in our own lives, playing the role we think we are expected to play. And the more we perform, the more disconnected we become from the part of us that started it all. For me, that disconnection turned into burnout. The kind that makes you feel numb even when everything's going well. I used to lie awake at night going over figures and decisions and staff problems, replaying moments again and again, like there was a perfect version of each day that I could somehow rewrite if I thought hard enough about it. I told myself that it was leadership, that this was what it took to run a successful place. But what it really was fear. Fear of failing, fear of being seen as less, fear of losing what I'd built. And that fear eats away at the edges of joy. It steals the small moments, the ones that actually matter. At some point, I remember standing in my own restaurant and realizing that everyone else in the room was smiling except for me. The staff were laughing, the guests were happy, the music was playing, but I was somewhere else entirely. I had built a place full of life and somehow forgotten how to live inside of it. That was the moment I knew something had to change. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, it was a quiet knowing, a soft voice in the back of my mind saying, "You have forgotten the song." When you spend long enough performing, you start to mistake tension for purpose. You think being busy means being alive, but it doesn't. It just means that you are filling space where stillness should be. I had to learn to be still again. The process was not sudden. It took hundreds of small realizations layered over time that I did not have to prove anything. The other people's expectations were never the measure of who I was. That success meant nothing if I was not at peace inside it. I began to notice how much energy I spent managing perception, trying to appear strong, calm, and in control. The truth is, I was terrified of being seen as struggling because in this industry, we're taught to keep smiling, to keep serving, to keep going no matter what. We tell ourselves we're doing it for the team, for the guests, for the business, but often we're doing it to avoid facing the fact that we are exhausted. And underneath that exhaustion is usually something deeper, a fear of being judged for needing rest and for not being superhuman. That fear is what my father was trying to save me from in that car all those years ago. He was teaching me that freedom is not just about being loud or brave, it's about being at peace with who you are, even when people are watching. For a long time, I forgot that. I traded authenticity for acceptance, and it cost me more than I realized. There came a point where I started to feel like I was watching my own life from the outside. The days were filled with noise, but I was not really present for any of them. It was a strange kind of emptiness when you could be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. That was the moment I started looking inward instead of outwards. I stopped asking how to make everything bigger, better, faster, and I started asking why I felt the need to. And in that stillness, something began to shift. The more I let go of control, the more peace I found. The more honest I became about what I was feeling, the more I realized how many others felt the same. We were all just pretending, holding up our own versions of strength, afraid to admit how heavy it had become. Somewhere along the way, I realized the goal is not to build a perfect life that looks good from the outside. The goal is to build a real one that feels good on the inside. And that starts with remembering the lesson my dad tried to teach me. That who we are is not defined by how others see us. That joy is not a performance, it's a presence. That the music that we are afraid to play too loud might just be the thing that brings us back to life. The strange thing about rediscovery is that it rarely happens all at once. It comes in fragments, a quiet morning where you actually taste your coffee again, a small laugh that you didn't have to force, moments when you catch yourself breathing deeply, not because you remember to, but because you finally can. That's how it began for me, not in grand gestures, but in stillness. I started noticing the tiny gaps between noise, the part of life that I had been speeding past, the sound of the plates being stacked in the kitchen, the rhythm of footsteps in the garden, and the space between conversations. All of it reminded me that life is still happening, even when I stopped trying to manage it. There was a time when I thought letting go would mean losing everything I had built, that slowing down would make it all fall apart. But the truth is, the business didn't crumble when I stopped obsessing over it. I did not lose control when I rested. What I lost was the constant fear that I had to earn every breath I took. You learn eventually that peace does not arrive as a reward for working hard enough. It arrives the moment you stop resisting it. And when I began to let that truth in, something changed. I stopped running from silence. I stopped apologizing for needing time. I stopped measuring myself against people who would never walk in the same path as me. And that is when I started to hear the music again. Not literally, but within myself. That quiet sense of being alive without needing to prove it. I wonder how many of us forgot that feeling. How many people wake up and immediately step into the performance. We adjust our expression before we even leave the house. We post a version of ourselves that looks composed. We say we are fine because the truth feels like far too much effort to explain. And each time we do it, we drift a little further from who we are. We give our energy to the image instead of the essence, and we try to control how people see us instead of learning how to see ourselves clearly. We start believing that worth comes from success, when really success is meant to come from worth. I used to think that self-acceptance was a destination, something you reached after enough reflection or growth. It's not. It's a daily practice, a quiet choice to be yourself again, even when the world tries to tell you not to be. That is what my dad was teaching me without saying another word. When he turned that music back up and carried on singing, he was showing me that joy does not need permission, that confidence is not volume, it's authenticity. And I forgot that for years. I let other people's expectations turn down the volume in my own voice. I forgot that I was supposed to be singing too. It took burnout to remind me that silence is not peace when it comes from fear. Real peace is the kind that can hold noise and still stay centered. Now, when I think of that lesson, I see it everywhere. I see it in people who are quietly questioning whether the life that they live in is really theirs. I see it in anyone who has forgotten that life is not a performance. It is participation. We live in a time where the world rewards presentation, how we look, what we achieve, how others perceive us. But none of that touches the soul. It might impress people, but it does not fulfill us. And the more we chase it, the further we move from the simplicity of being present. Sometimes I think the hardest part of growing up is unlearning everything the world taught us about what matters. You spent your whole childhood being yourself without thinking twice. And then you spend your adulthood trying to remember how to be that person again. We all lose our music in different ways. For some, it's the fear of failure. For others, it's comparison or shame or the weight of responsibility. But underneath all of it is the same truth. We forget that we are allowed to just fully be ourselves. And when that happens, life becomes quieter, not in the peaceful way, but in the disconnected way. We stop laughing as much, we stop noticing beauty, we start surviving instead of living. That was me, until I started to remember. Now I try and build my days around small acts of presence. Not because I have all the answers, but because I finally stopped trying to find them in the wrong places. I do not look for validation in results anymore. I look for it in alignment. Am I being honest? Am I being kind? Am I being myself? If the answer is yes, that is enough. And that is what I want anyone listening to this to take away. You might not run a restaurant, you might not even be in hospitality, but you probably know what it feels like to hide behind an image or to chase approval that never really fills the gap. We all do it. We all learn at some point that pretending is exhausting, that peace cannot exist in pretense. You cannot be free and controlled at the same time. The day you decide to stop performing is the day that you start to heal. The day that you stop comparing is the day you start to see yourself clearly. The day you stop chasing is the day you start arriving. And when all that happens, when you finally stop long enough to feel it, life starts to sound different. The background noise fades, the fear quietens, the rhythm returns. It's not dramatic, it's just real. And in that stillness, if you listen closely enough, you might start to hear your own song again. That is what my father taught me without knowing it. That is what I forgot, and that's what I had to relearn. That joy is not loud or showy. It's simple and it's honest. It's being at peace in your own skin. So if you're listening to this and you feel like you've lost your spark, if you feel disconnected or drained or just unsure of who you are anymore, I want you to know this. You do not need to reinvent yourself. You just need to remember yourself. You were never meant to live for an audience. You were meant to live for the experience. The people who truly matter do not need you to be perfect. They just need you to be real. So start there. Start small. Do one thing today that makes you feel alive, even if no one else understands it. Play your song, whatever that is for you. Sing in the car again. Dance in your kitchen. Say the truth out loud. Do it not because it looks good, but because it feels like you. And if anyone looks at you strangely, just let them, because they are only seeing what you have just remembered. Freedom. That word needs more of that. It needs more people who are not afraid to be themselves. More people who can laugh without needing permission. More people who can lead with heart without worrying about how it looks. Because when one person lives authentically, it gives everyone else around them permission to do the same. That is what my dad did for me. He showed me in one small moment what it looks like to live unfiltered. He did not explain it, he lived it. And it took me years to understand just how powerful that was. Now when I think back to that car, I do not see just a memory, I see a mirror, a reminder that the music never really stops. We just stop listening. And maybe the point of all this, the work, the growth, the mistakes, the rediscovery, is not to become someone new, but to finally hear the song again. So wherever you are right now, whatever you're carrying, I hope you find a quiet moment to turn the music back up. Not to drown anything out, not to perform, just to feel alive. Because that is what life is for. And if you ever forget, remember the lesson that started it all. Do not let what other people think of you change who you are or what you do. Now turn it back up and carry on singing. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and a subscribe. It helps me, it helps the channel, and it helps people like us find the content that really matters. And if you have a memory from your childhood that helped shape you into who you are today, put it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. As always, I'd also like to remind you that you matter too. Don't forget that.